esta pena ya dejemos ya.
August 1813, and it's the battle that time forgot.
This Week in Texas History, brought to you by this station and the Save Texas History program of the General Land Office.
August 18th, 1813, near San Antonio, Spanish Texas is in revolt. Insurgents, hoping to pull Texas away from Spain, have stormed in and declared independence. 1,400 occupy the town, but 4,000 Spanish troops arrive to put down the rebellion. Near the Medina River, the armies clash in one of the bloodiest battles in Texas history. After 4 hours, close to 1,000 soldiers lay dead. The brief republic is no more. One Spanish soldier named Santa Anna would return here 23 years later to put down rebels at a place called the Alamo. The little-known Battle of Medina happened this week in Texas history.
San Antonio. I want to thank you guys. That last show, I was getting some really great responses. We are going to protect our ancestors' burial grounds. Today, as to what you just saw there, we're here with one of Texas's historians and probably one of the leading historians on Texas history here, Mr. Dan Arellano. He's going to be speaking here and referencing to the reenactment that's coming up this weekend, this Saturday, the Battle of Medina, there in Von Army, Texas. This is Dan Arellano. Hi, Dan.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm.
It's always great to come back. I have been here a couple of times, but it's always good to be back.
Well, you know, we had did the State Board of Education when you had got this submittal in as far as the Battle of Medina when Texas declared its independence there.
Yeah. Well, 5 years ago, I testified for the State Board of Education. They were having some issues. They were trying to remove a lot of our ancestors, the history of our ancestors, and we showed up in big numbers and we said, absolutely not. They tried to remove Thurgood Marshall, Cesar Chavez, and Dolores Huerta. Now, they were successful in removing Dolores Huerta, but the irony of it all is that while they were removing Dolores Huerta, she was in Washington, D.C., being awarded the Medal of Freedom by President Barack Obama.
Wow.
Imagínate, she was not good enough for the curriculum, but good enough.
The Sessions live in Texas.
Got that right, yes.
You know, that was pretty interesting there, and, you know, we did have a big rally afterwards, and you know, a lot of changes happened in 2010.
Yes. One of the great things that happened is that my testimony was adopted, the Battle of Medina and the founding of the First Republic of Texas, Bernardo Gutierrez Lara, that was adopted and put into the curriculum to be taught in the 7th grade, but only as an elective. We need to have it made mandatory that this part of history be in the curriculum, because if you look at the number of kids that are in school today, the overwhelming majority are Tejanitos, you know, they're Latinos, and they need to know about the history prior to 1836.
And you know what you guys did, and let me let you watch this.
Lo que usted verá en la película Texas antes del Álamo es la saga de los españoles en Texas 150 años antes de la batalla de El Álamo. Es la historia de los pioneros que nombraron los ríos y fundaron las misiones, ranchos, presidios y vías a lo largo del camino real de tierra afuera en Texas. It is a world that has long been forgotten until now. A virtual Spanish gone with the wind in the American experience.
History is a living thing. It is evangelization through history.
That trailer, Dan, is going to be astronomical as far as getting the identity of the Tejanos and the natives that fought and died for Texas independence.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, this is going to be one of the greatest changes
Yes.
with working
Yes.
with these people here, with Mr. Almanas and yourself. And where do you see, or how are you getting that flag raised on the resolution you did, Dan?
Well, there's only one way to do it, and that's within the system. We've got to go through our state legislatures. It's a state issue. Dr. Frank de la Teja, he's always concerned about that 6 flags over Texas deal. But he's right, because there were 7 flags over Texas.
And then, how are you being received? After you got that resolution, you went to the city here in San Antonio.
Well, actually, we went to the state legislature up in Austin. This has to be addressed at the state level. And State Representative Eddie Rodriguez submitted a resolution called House Resolution 709. It was adopted. And of course, now a resolution is not as big as a bill. What we
So we
really
need
need
somebody
is a
like Jose
bill.
Menendez to do a bill.
Yes, we
Right.
need more state representatives, and all of this was due to former Senator Uriegas. I believe he lives here in San Antonio now, but he's the one that suggested that we contact the Mexican American State Legislative Caucus in order to get a bill to acknowledge the fact that our ancestors declared their independence 23 years before the Alamo.
And the Constitution was written, but we're still not wanting them to accept. That was done on April 17th, 1813.
Yes, that was the first written Constitution. Now, the Declaration of Independence occurred right here in San Antonio on April the 6th of 1813, written by Bernardo Gutierrez de Lara, and then 10 days later, he had the Constitution.
Now, next year for the 300 celebration, the city, you are on the
Yes.
board. Have you coordinated that event so the citizens don't know?
Yes, I have submitted the request. to have the founding of the First Republic and the Constitution as events that will be recognized by the Tricentennial Committee. Not only that one, but I also submitted, I didn't, but the Atascosa County, Barbara Westbrook submitted an event on the Battle of Medina Symposium, and I submitted one for the Battle of Medina Historical event. Both of them will be recognized by the Tricentennial.
Now, with that resolution, who are you fighting? Why isn't it that flag flying today, Dan?
It's all politics, because the revolution was led by Native Americans and Tejanos primarily. See, there were over 900 Tejanos and about 300 Native Americans.
As far as what Bush said at the beginning.
Well, Bush is wrong. You know, they don't bother to contact real historians. The Battle of Medina was fought by 1,830 Spanish soldiers against the Republican Army of the North that consisted of 1,400. And the overwhelming majority were indigenous and Tejanos. There was only about 300, and I do not like to call them Americans, because in those days, everybody was an American.
But you know, we're in a big battle today with what's happening on the Alamo issue and in the city.
Oh, that's been a continuous battle.
Well, yeah, and to sort of correct this, let me let you watch this.
Whether it happened or it happened as dramatically as it's been depicted, quien sabe, who knows. But it certainly is a moment that's forever etched in the lore of the Republic and the Colt Patterson and the Texas Rangers.
The legend of the Rangers and their Colts grew after an encounter with the Comanches at Bandera Pass in 1844.
The Comanches charged at the Rangers, expecting the Rangers to dismount, to reload, to fire again. Except the Rangers didn't dismount. They pulled out the Patterson revolvers. Hayes yelled, "Charge," and into the middle of them they went. The Comanches were more than amazed. They were shocked. One of the Indians said, "I will not fight Jack Hayes no more, for he has a shot for every finger on his hand."
The Comanche called him in one of their wonderfully long names, a man who it is very bad luck to get in a fight with because devils side with him.
The rise of Devil Jack and the Texas Rangers meant the inevitable decline of the Comanche Nation, but not before the Rangers adopted more Comanche tactics.
They adopted their stealth tactics. They adopted their techniques of riding, and they borrowed something else. They borrowed their terror.
The Rangers would make terror their most effective weapon when they fought in the Mexican War. The annexation of Texas to the United States in 1845 sparked the Mexican War. Up until then, the Rangers had earned a hard-won reputation within Texas as fearless fighters against Indian and Mexican raiders. But it was during the Mexican War that the Rangers' legend would spread far beyond the state's borders. Fighting alongside their new countrymen against an old enemy, the Rangers' controversial actions would brand them Los Diablos Tejanos, the Devil Texans.
Now that's the involvement of where this all started for indigenous people and even Tejanos, because Austin, in that invasion that when they came, as far as McGee and all them, and prior to the 1810, I think you were saying about?
Well, yeah, it actually started right here in San Antonio in 1811 with the Casas Revolt. Juan Bautista de las Casas came here saying that he was going to be involved in the horse industry. But that was a lie. He came up here to raise trouble.
Well,
Por el grito de Dolores.
That was sort of with that, the slavery as far as this being indentured servants.
Well, when the Americans came, they tried to evade the issue of slavery. They brought their slaves, but they called them indentured servants. But regardless of what you call them, it was slavery. And it was brutal, it was cruel, unjust, and immoral.
Well, you know, you referenced to McGee.
Yes.
And who wanted his head?
Well, Augustus McGee, it's always been written that Augustus McGee suffered a mysterious death. But not so, I say. Augustus McGee, at the 4-month siege at the Presidio at Goliad, was just too eager to surrender. He was seen cavorting with the enemy. He was having dinner with Simón Herrera and Manuel Salcedo, the governors, And they requested the head of Gutierrez de Lara. The only way they would allow him to retreat is if they surrendered Gutierrez de Lara to them. And when he reported that back to the group that was inside the Presidio, the Tejano said, absolutely not. You're not going to surrender one of us. And then he was found a couple of days later dead. But it's no mystery. He was murdered for daring.
Is this the Tejanos?
Yes.
And, you know, that period of time we had the Battle of 1812, and you know the
New Orleans,
the peak, and all these people were identifying we need to move in as quickly as possible. And whether that group came down, you know, Crockett was there in the Battle of Fort Mims. Matter of fact, let me let you watch this.
During Crockett's time in the Creek Indian War, he was a mounted scout. He was chosen for the job because of his background as a hunter and a woodsman. The soldiers were having a terrible time. They were faced with starvation. And Crockett used his hunting skills to try to feed the soldiers.
When the war was over, Crockett would return to Tennessee to face tragedy.
No sooner had he returned home than Polly died. She had been fine after the birth of their third child, Margaret, but she soon took ill and passed on rapidly. Davy was devastated.
Crockett needed to find a mother for his children, and soon thereafter married a widow, Elizabeth Patton.
Davy took his new family west to Lawrence County, Tennessee, and settled along fast-moving Shoal Creek. The Patton family was a prosperous one, and Elizabeth had some money. And Davy used this inheritance to set up a grist mill.
Crockett established his mill along the edge of the creek.
And at the same time, he began his political career. First as magistrate, later as colonel of the local militia regiment, thus the title Colonel Crockett. And soon he began to think about running for the state legislature.
In Crockett's time, candidates traveled the backwoods and stood on tree stumps to give their speeches.
And then, you know, that at that time, but what was so important here in Texas, that when these people came and that battle not being acknowledged as far as when they did declare Texas independence, and its Constitution written, and those that pledged and fought and died not being acknowledged. How do we get that flag in the air, Dan?
You're talking about the emerald green flag of the
sir.
First Republic of Texas. It has to be done through the legislature. Now, there's a movement going on that we started with one of our representatives, Eddie Rodriguez from Austin and Philip Cortez here from San Antonio. Of course, I was working with my other representative, but she failed to get reelected. I can't think of her name. But anyway, she was not reelected, and then we had to start all over again. But it's important to, it's very, very important for us, since the students in schools today, the overwhelming majority are Tejanitos, Hispanics. I don't like to use those terms because those are 20th century terms. Yeah. And the only way we can get that done is through the legislature. We have to keep petitioning them, making sure that they understand that Texas history does not begin with the arrival of Stephen F. Austin. Some people call this Texas Revolution an invasion. It depends on who wrote the history. If you listen to Mexican historians, which we do frequently, and one of the reasons I say that, when Mexican historians speak, they do so from a position of authority. And that's because they've got the diaries, they've got the records, the reports.
You said you went with George Nelson, right?
George Nelson and I and Dr. Felix Almaraz, we have made numerous trips to Mexico to seek out primary sources. If you do not seek out primary sources and somebody made an error in translation or the wrong place, remember Spanish history, written Spanish history back then is not the same as it is today, and they could have had different meanings. So Almaraz says if we find primary sources, we will be much better off because they wrote down what they saw and what they accomplished.
Well, even what with George Nelson, his group with Jesse, and then when they did. Matter of fact, let me let you see what they had said there in Pleasanton, Texas.
A copy of the Gacetas over there. This is the English traduction. I mean, not a pretty good English. There was a high schooler who traduced it for me. And also, you notice that there's a newspaper over there, El Mexica. Where I got it? Okay, let me look through here. Hold on. The Mexica newspaper was a newspaper that was published in Spanish, and it lasted for 12 years in San Antonio. I was the last director of El Mexica. And inside, I published the Gaceta de Texas in the Spanish version for the Gaceta de Texas. As many of you know, the Gaceta de Texas was published in May the 25th, 1813 at the Old Stone Fort at Nacogdoches, the Casa de Gilibarbo, ¿verdad? And it was owned by Samuel Davenport. I had Samuel Davenport portrait against the wall on that side. We kind of reduced over here. I couldn't bring the whole collection of paintings. If anybody else, like the Allens and the Sims, Tom Green, the Sims and the Allens and somebody else, descendants here, if anybody has drawings or pictures, I'll be glad to reproduce them and make old paintings to increase my collection. And we're putting up the things at the different museums. We got a Bernardo Gutierrez now inside the old Spanish Governor Palace this past March, right? Mr. Dan was promoting that event. So we placed the Bernardo Gutierrez inside the Spanish Governor Palace. And I have another Bernardo Gutierrez in the Obispado in Monterrey, because there's a lot of belongings, personal belongings of Bernardo on that room. So I put another portrait in there. And I have another one in there, which is based on a drawing by Jose Cisneros. It's after Jose Cisneros. Everything that I paint here is based on historical facts. I'm a historian, archivist, and the biographer of Bernardo Gutierrez, and I have the genealogy, the contacts of the Gutierrez. If I'm missing anyone, I would like to know them. I have a replica for the Gaceta de Texas. The original is over there, which they have only one copy in Washington. Okay, so what I did is just I duplicated it a little bit, touch up in here and there. You as an artist, you know the artists what they do, and make it look like the actual Gaceta de Texas. But I'm sorry, but we have only one copy. So we have a replica right here from the original in Washington, and the press that was used to publish this Gaceta de Texas.
That being said, and acknowledge the Davenport and all these sons of the Republic of Texas today, why aren't they acknowledging the contributions that Tejanos are not sons of the Republic, or indigenous people are not sons of the Republic? That's when Texas declared its independence.
Exactly. That's the first Declaration of Independence and the first Constitution that were written. But because there were Mexicanos and indigenous, it's kind of like in Arizona. Arizona has passed a law forbidding the teaching of Mexican-American history. Well, that's not right.
Has the legislation done that in Texas, Dan?
No, not here. We have a powerful Mexican-American caucus in the state legislature.
So it's a duty of the Mexican-American
it's their
caucus.
Duty and their responsibility.
And that's where you as citizens need to call your representatives and inform them. Look, let's start teaching some Native American history along with the Tejanos and the work they've done for Texas independence. And this is important, really, really important.
It is.
That's why this man is dedicated to run for
State Board of Education.
The Texas State Board of Education.
Yes.
Y'all Google ignorance, or how did I put it? I put it up on YouTube. Anyways, I'll get that to you later.
Yes.
But that run for the state board, what's your mission, Dan?
The truth. I've always been an advocate of education, veterans, children, teachers, but most importantly, an advocate for the truth. Mm-hmm. The truth not only in science, but also in history. I apologize for my phone.
No, you're good. It's happened to me a few times. You know, this could be one of the biggest game changers for us, especially, you know, indigenous people still aren't being heard. It seems like we're being reinvaded again.
Yes.
You know, we've asked them to protect, you know, on my last show, our ancestors, they're buried there at the missions, you know. This is really important.
Yes. I was at the Bob Bullock Texas History Museum for 2 years, and they had absolutely nothing on Native Americans.
Yeah.
You can't tell the history of Texas without Native Americans. They were here first.
And, you know,
they have survived here, according to the Galt Project up in Florence, Texas, over 17,000 years, which means that there were plenty of natural resources in the area for those people to survive.
You know, we tried to tell them about why the migration, even with Father Oliveri, and I think it was 1693, was for the healing of the healing waters of Yanaguana.
Yes.
As far as these healing waters, they don't want to acknowledge because they're not theirs.
Yes.
Those are ours, and you can't heal with our waters. And that not even being referenced to because we're having this mismanagement on what's happening. I don't know if it's legislation. Here in the city, we sort of have identified why we're not being included, why our ancestors aren't being protected, why we're still having to glorify it. I mean, even, I think it was Shaw, Councilman Shaw got into office 1 month later. They're taking down the Confederate monument because the blacks don't want it. It represents slavery. Wait, what about what the indigenous said about the father of the genocide, Christopher Columbus? 16 years the Texas Indigenous Council has asked for this monument to come down. So this is our prayer and what we had gone to City Hall. I want to thank you guys. This program has been a blessing for us to get this to you. And please be there Saturday. And let's raise the flag for Texas. God bless you guys.
Esta pena ya déjalo ya.